Hey folks, welcome back to the DarkHorse Podcast live stream Q&A section number 44, where we meet your Q's with our A's.
Sounds lewd.
Only if that's where your mind defaults.
I don't think so.
You don't think so?
No.
You think they took it as a little bit lewd?
A little bit.
I didn't intend it as lewd, just so we're clear.
All right. Hello. Hi. We will start with a few questions from the last episode, and then pick up a question from Discord server, and then get to your questions from the last hour. All right. Hi, Bret and Heather. Thanks for answering my ayahuasca question last week. You mentioned that humans aren't the only species that expresses gender. What other species also do it, and how, please? So I thought this just warranted a quick mention that the way that I've been defining gender and the way that it fits for me with all of the manifestations that I've seen people use it is that it is effectively the behavioral expression of sex, and that in every animal that's non-human, in all the non-human animals, that what we call that is sex role. And so there are sex roles that species from anemone fish to seahorses to antelope to elephant seals to dolphins and umbrella birds have, and they are sex specific. So we don't call it gender in other species, but it is if gender is the behavioral expression of sex, then you're going to have that happen anytime you've got behavior, which is certainly all mammals and birds, and probably all vertebrates, and a tremendous number of inverts as well, tremendous number of insects.
So I have been defining gender differently. I've said it is the software of sex, in which case gender will be found in birds and mammals to a substantial degree, but differing degrees within those clades, and not much found outside of them. So I guess there's a question about which definition of gender we're going with. Now,
I think that's interesting, because those I like both of those definitions. Behavioral expression of sex, which is the one that I've been saying for years and have written into pieces that I've written, and you're saying the software of sex, and they are overlapping but not completely. And so they do have different ramifications for how you view, say, the stereotyped lordosis behavior of a female lizard. Is that gender or not? It would be by my definition, but not by yours. But the overlap, I think, is pretty much perfect when it comes to humans. Like we have no variance at all there. So
just so people know why the difference is immense between these two definitions, because most critters will not have gender, because most critters don't meet their parents, and therefore whatever sex role they have will be programmed in at a genetic level.
If behavior is stereotyped, then it doesn't count as gender by your definition.
Right. And so the point about it being, if you accept that it is the software of sex, then the point is software is vastly more flexible than hardware. In a lizard that doesn't meet its parents and exhibits the stereotyped behaviors, there isn't a lot of flexibility, because in order for the creature to be functional, that stuff had to be written in. And the fact that it is written in is amazing in so many creatures, but the vast majority will have nothing that we would call software. It's much more like, maybe firmware. It's programmed by the genes and all but unalterable.
Mm-hmm. Next question is a reference to Holly Mathnerd wrote last time, what's your favorite Star Trek series and why is it Deep Space Nine? And this person writes, I am paying you $20 to watch the magnificent Ferengi? I'm just
Ferengi.
Is it Ferengi?
Yeah.
Episode of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Season 6, Episode 10. So I'm sure it's better than Cuties. I'll give it that sight unseen.
I feel confident that will also be my judgment.
No, we've heard indirectly from a lot of people now that you were wrong. The idea that this was just sort of a workplace drama is exactly wrong. And actually, one of the analyses I saw reminded me of, it sounds, I know nothing about this show. I literally know nothing about it. I've never seen one. But that it reminded me a little bit of what actually Bob Trivers had told us with regard to why, when we went to grad school, we should go to a place with a museum. One of the reasons being that when you're at an important research museum, people from all over the world with different research questions and different backgrounds and different biases and expectations and hypotheses come through. And so the idea of a space station workplace drama is as a place where all the rest of the world comes through and you get to interact with them. It strikes me as potentially the reason that it could be exactly as good as many people, including Holly Math Nerd and perhaps Ragnar of the Desert, think it is.
I don't think I said that Deep Space Nine was a workplace drama. I think maybe the Next Generation is a workplace drama. I said that Deep Space Nine suffered from nothing ever happening.
Oh.
But in any case, apparently things do happen enough that people are captivated by this series.
Okay.
So there it is.
There it is. Hey, both. Thanks so much for your work. I've been puzzling for a while why there are almost zero woke debates held anywhere. You'd think they would want to get their messages out. Thanks, Tim. They can't do it, though. They'd be terrible at it.
Yeah, it is inherently a terrible position because the thing is, maybe debate is the wrong term, but a dialectic is predicated on the idea that there is some truth to discover, and wokeness is predicated on the idea that there isn't, and so it's a mismatch. I will.
Yeah, they'd sooner want to engage in sword fighting. Of course, I'm sure they can't do that either.
Right.
Right.
Yes.
Yes.
No, doing things is not their strong suit.
No, but
destroying things, maybe.
Doing things and thinking things, both not so much.
Right. So I will point people again to the Braver Angels podcast with John Wood Jr. and Bob Woodson and
I don't remember
is
his
it
name.
Duke Newsom?
I don't know.
I hope I have it right. I hope I have not embarrassingly pulled a name from somewhere else in
I've done that
the
before
universe.
here.
Well, I hope I didn't.
Yeah.
But in any case, if you look for Bob Woodson, you will find, I think it's Duke Newsom as the counterpart. And there is a very good debate between an IDW style person in Bob Woodson and Duke on the other side as a high up in BLM, and John Wood Jr. as moderator. And it does give you a sense for how these things go. And I must say, it goes about as you would expect.
Well, I mean, interestingly, actually, our introduction to John Wood Jr. was when he moderated a debate put on by the Bridging the Divide, I think it's called, organization based here in Portland, between us and two people who were representing the woke side. And there is audio and poor quality video of that too, somewhere out there in the world.
Yep.
And I mean, John, it was our introduction to John. He's extraordinary as a moderator in that sort of situation, and doesn't let anyone sink, but lets people sink themselves when that's what's going to happen.
When that is warranted. Yeah. Yes.
All right, next question. Last question. Final question from episode 43. A great deal of businesses, this is more of a comment, I think. A great deal of businesses here in Wisconsin seem to be owned and run by Republicans. In my experience, those of us who are left of center have had to tread carefully, sometimes even fearful of repercussions for speaking up. Many of us have to listen to far-right, libtard-type rhetoric by superiors and are subject to them making business decisions based on their Ayn Rand beliefs. It's intense and impacts us as much as those who lament being on the right while working at liberally owned companies, right? Question mark?
Yeah.
Yeah, I imagine it is. So this is, I think this is fascinating actually, because we know, as liberals who were in academia for many years, it is well documented that, and anecdotally there is no denying it, that academia is so liberal that to be conservative there would be very, very hard indeed. And I think the same is true of media and of Hollywood and of many other kinds of organizations as well, but that small business might well have the opposite bias. And basically what Sharon is pointing to here is that anytime you're in a tiny minority where the majority is so certain of the widespread acceptance of its politics, it's it's hard to sit on your hands, and it can make you stronger. It'll make you better at actually responding to the arguments from the other side because you're surrounded by them all the time. I think part of what's going on the woke left is that these are people largely, the privileged among them were schooled in colleges and universities where there has been effectively no conservative presence for so long that they've never heard the arguments against what they're saying. Now, of course, I would also argue that we, as actual liberals, would push back against the woke nonsense, but they're increasingly silencing us too. And we are ever rarer at universities as well, to wit, being in exile along with many other people who are just leaving because there's no place for us.
You just point to me and say to wit, which is 4 half-wits.
Yes.
But so
it's a lot more wits than most people have.
It's not bad. I wasn't going to complain. I just wanted to,
point it out,
note it in passing.
Sure.
So I would say I have been trying to catalyze something that I have occasionally called the founding of your other left, and the idea that
other left.
What?
The other left.
Yeah. Your other left.
Yeah.
So the thing is, I'm now seeing increasing awareness on the right and amongst many people I respect on the right, a relief and a happiness at discovering that there are people who will proudly proclaim themselves as on the left who are making sense and are not crazy. Mm-hmm. And so in any case, I do think that this is a slow battle, but that what really needs to happen is those of us who are part of this this old intellectual left tradition that still, has pockets of life, that those of us who belong to that need to be clear enough about who we are and why we are there, that it does begin to dawn on all of those who have been dismissing the left, with this mind-numbing libtard rhetoric, yep. That they become aware that it is not so simple. And, many people, Ben Shapiro, Greg Gutfeld, Tucker Carlson, all of these folks have registered that actually there's a necessity of the left. Mm-hmm. And what I'm hoping ultimately—
And that it's not totally absent.
Right. Mm-hmm. That the vestiges are there. Mm-hmm. It's just being drowned out by something that isn't left at all. It's quite illiberal. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, we need to have a discussion about what the left got right, mm-hmm. what the right got right, and how we are now living the benefits of the tension between these two things. And frankly, I think people will be surprised if they do an honest accounting of just how much the left has been correct about, historically speaking.
Now, one of the things in what you said that's so important is the idea of tension. That one of the many reasons that utopia is a dangerous fiction and can never happen is that any versions of utopia I've ever heard of imagine a life without strife, a life without tension. And tension is the thing that both provides meaning and a force to strive against, and allows things from descending into total chaos on either side of the spectrum. And that's what we're seeing as for instance, as the protests in the street are allowed to do whatever they want with no pushback at all from the would-be leadership. It's just revealing itself ever more with every week as more insane. And, it's not that it's, I think, becoming more insane. It's just able to reveal itself as more and more of the insane thing that it's always been. Yeah.
And in fact, I did not get around to showing in the first hour that data was collected by actually an organization that's based here in Portland, has a Washington, D.C. office. Data was collected that reveals that there is essentially very little support. Here we have it.
Do you want to show it?
Sure.
Zachary?
All right. So this entity, DHM Research, scroll down, take a look at some of the charts. Okay. Not that one. Keep going. Okay. So approval of the protests is, you need to scroll up a little more. There you go.
So this is Oregonians who were surveyed disagree. 51% of Oregonians who were surveyed disagree that President Trump has done an appropriate job with regard to response to the protests, but 39 or disagree strongly rather. But if you include disagree strongly and somewhat disagree, a majority of Oregonians feel that Trump, Governor Brown, and Mayor Wheeler all have done a pretty poor job.
Pretty poor job.
Yeah.
And keep
and
going.
Then the response in terms of Portland police officers is far more varied.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
And it's a confusing one. I wouldn't know how to answer that because I don't think the Portland police have done a very good job.
They haven't been allowed the freedom to do what they need to do. Yeah. More. You want me to go farther?
Yeah, keep going.
Some of these are hard to interpret at a first pass.
So scroll up a little more.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. Approval level of Portland protests in Oregon. 52% strongly disagree with the protests.
Yeah. So the Tri-County is basically the Portland metro area. It's going to be Multnomah, Clackamas, and Washington.
Yeah. Okay. Even in the Willamette Valley.
Willamette Valley, which is the bigger area that we live in. But when you include strongly disagree and somewhat disagree, you have a strong majority, even in the Tri-County area, that are saying, yeah, these protests are not anything that we are interested in playing along with anymore.
Keep going.
Okay.
Ongoing protests are helpful or harmful to Black Portlanders.
So this is Black Portlanders answering, isn't it? Or no?
No.
Oh, okay.
I think this is 2.
Okay.
Yeah, 2 race relations, right.
Okay.
So there is 31% believe that the protests are very harmful to Black Portlanders. 17% say somewhat harmful. 38% believe it is very harmful to race relations. 15% say somewhat harmful. Efforts to make police reforms, 32% very, 17% somewhat. So a lot of skepticism about these protests. Keep going. Here we go. Are the protests violent? Right.
Percent of the choice. Yeah.
56% of people think they're mostly violent, which I would agree. They are. If they reliably turn to violence, they are mostly violent.
It really, this is going to sound Clintonian, but it kind of depends on what your definition of mostly is, as all of these things do, right?
I agree, but
if you're doing a kind of like ethogram and every 30 seconds looking and going like, I'm going to record violent or not violent. Okay, next 30 seconds, violent or not violent.
But then you get garbage, as you said.
Then you get the 93% peaceful.
93% peaceful.
Right.
And
so what does mostly violent mean? But if you take it by day, it depends on your interval of recording, right? Like how many days of protests have been violent? Oh, mostly violent, actually.
But this is a test of something different. So I agree you can define these things and you can get any answer you want, but that's part of the point, is that that's exactly what's been done to us. And when you ask people, common parlance, is this mostly peaceful or mostly violent? 56% of it say mostly violent by whatever the intuitive definition of this is. And I think they're absolutely right. Yeah. So anyway, we don't need to go all the way through this report, and
we should probably get back to the questions.
Yeah. So let's do that.
Oops. Okay, next question from the Discord server, and then we will get to the questions from today. You've discussed historical examples of fascism and communism: Maoist China, the Soviet Union, Nazi Germany, Venezuela, Chile, etc. Are there historical examples where the madness was defeated before it became catastrophic? From these, what lessons can we learn and apply to our current circumstances?
This is a very hard question to answer.
They knew this was going to be hard. Apparently, Douglas Murray was asked this question recently on trigonometry, and also had a hard time with it.
I think the reason that it's hard is that if something avoids being what one fears that it is going to turn into, then there's no way to distinguish between whether it was never headed to be that and people were catastrophizing over nothing, or whether they successfully beat back the danger.
The history, it will be hard to write the history that says we beat this thing before it got bad.
Yeah.
And there will be at least as many histories written that say it wasn't the thing they thought it was going to be.
Yeah. And, there's also the possibility in some cases that something that was headed to someplace very bad went somewhere bad, but it could have been way worse. And so how do you rank that? So I don't know.
I mean, and just in terms of the actual question, I don't know enough history to come up with things that might look like what we're describing now. But I imagine that there would be lessons to be learned.
Yeah. It's a great question.
Yeah.
How the methodology is the tough part.
Okay. Religions and secular faiths, such as social justice, are subcategories of one sociocognitive phenomenon, narrative. Dogmas unite a group against others. Dogmas unite a group against others with shared epistemology, morality, and central narrative. Thoughts?
Are subcategories of a sociocognitive phenomenon. Dogmas unite a group. Yeah, I mean, I think so. Loosely speaking, that's about right, yeah. And it's true.
I'm not sure. So I guess I wonder, dogmas unite a group against others with shared epistemology, morality, and central narrative. I wonder, that might be the three things that are actually defining. I'd want to think more about whether or not you could simplify those. Does that collapse to one or two variables, or are there more things that define what a dogma is that are not on that list? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if either thing is missing or if it can be simplified.
And it may also be, in some sense, overdrawn, because we see the same phenomenon inside of scientific disciplines. Mm-hmm. Right? A particular school of thought will take over. Mm-hmm. And it's not entirely clear to me that it doesn't actually share morality with the schools of thought that are driven out, that it just wins temporarily some game over publications or something.
Well, but maybe, the argument then I think would be it's not. No, it's actually, you're right. I was going to say that's not a secular faith, but this person is defining a dogma as a bigger group than religions and secular faiths. Those are subcategories.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I think morality, at least, is a sometimes variable, but not always, in defining one dogma against another.
Although it's possible, based on the way the question is written, that the moralities don't have to differ, right? You can be united with your fellows in a dogma.
It doesn't have to be the thing that defines you against others. It just has to be the thing that helps you define in group.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Next question. Accepting that the plural of anecdote isn't data, what role can or may anecdotes play, if any, in analysis? Particularly repeated and or highly translatable anecdotes, or analyzing qualitative rather than quantitative circumstances. I wanted to pull something up, actually. If you want to riff for a minute, I want to pull something up.
Sure, I'll riff. The sense of the danger of anecdotes is way overdrawn. And in some sense, it is designed by the same people who are constantly wielding, the data is king, what do the data say, data-driven research, these sorts of things, which sound right. It sounds sophisticated to be skeptical of anecdotes. And it sounds very sophisticated to say that the multiple of anecdote is not data. On the other hand, first of all, in a complex system, when you do observation, you are observing anecdotes. That's how you get to a hypothesis that's worthy of test. And so let's just say if anecdote exists in the observational phase of scientific research, it's perfectly legitimate, and it just simply travels by a different name. So in any case, there are certain things that are deployed to keep a powerful group powerful, and this is one of them. So I would say correlation implies causation when it's preceded by a properly predictive hypothesis, despite what you've been told. And anecdote is a very important source of information about a system. It is not in and of itself a test of a hypothesis.
Yep.
Though it can be used as a spot check, right? You can have a hypothesis for some reason, and then you can check it against the anecdotes in your head and say, actually, I don't believe that hypothesis because I know 6 instances in which they would have gone a different way, each of which were anecdotes.
You can falsify with anecdote.
Yep.
What I wanted to say, I can't find the actual paper, but there's a reading that I used to give from Barbara Smuts, who was on my doctoral committee and one of the important researchers in baboon behavior, and specifically who focused on female baboon behavior. And in her book, Sex and Friendship in Baboons, she wrote a bit about basically the kinds of data that you take in the field. And so I just went looking into my behavioral methodology lectures that I would give to students before I sent them out to try to start to become animal behaviorists. And I don't find it there, but she has a sort of a taxonomy of course, the kind of thing that you can see over and over again between individuals and also keep track of the context in which you saw them are the things that we look for when we are going to apply statistical analysis to the data. But there are two other categories of things, and I just don't have it in my head, and I can't pull it up here. Some of which happen occasionally, but under such dissimilar circumstances that even though you might have 10 instances, you still can't apply statistics to them because you know that they're the same, but they're not the same enough. And then some of which you may actually just see once or twice. And so there is no expectation that you would actually be able to apply statistics. And therefore, you can, and if you can't apply statistics, we basically don't call it data, except that, and if it's only one-off or two-off thing, we tend to call it anecdote. But over in trying to understand behavior land, over in animal behavior land, the rarest things are often the most explanatory and certainly the most exciting. So, we know that chimps sometimes wage war on one another because Jane Goodall saw it happen once over an extended period of days. But it's one, I think it was a fissioning group that then drew a line in the sand effectively and fighted with one another. And fought with one another. And similarly, you will find, just other kinds of territorial takeovers or sexual takeovers or either between groups or the replacement of an alpha or defense by females by a usurping male against infanticide. These sorts of things happen rarely enough that you may not have enough for data. But once you see it, if you're out there trying to understand animals, you then have a very different model of what it is that's happening and what's driving them. It's the rare event that often is explanatory, and no, we can't plug it into stats, but it will be the thing that informs our understanding maybe more than, and today they've foraged again. Of course they did, right?
Once upon a time, back before we became so stupid, we used to know this. Right.
You're not talking about us.
No, we are trying to opt out of stupid. It's sometimes a full-time job, but it used to be that natural history was understood to be a scientifically valid pursuit, and in fact, a very important one. And the fact is, the data-driven science people have, among other things, they've driven out theory and they've driven out natural history. So used to be, you saw something remarkable, like I once saw what I believe to be a woodpecker riding on the back of a crow.
What?
It was amazing.
Where?
In a deep lake in
Sun Lakes
in eastern Washington. But in any case, right?
I don't think you told me this.
I also saw a moose there, right?
Yeah,
a moose in the desert, right? So here's the thing: there used to be a thing called a natural history note, where you saw something, it was unmistakable what you saw, and you documented as much about what it was that you saw, and then you just simply reported it so that everybody would have the benefit of effectively having seen the same thing.
Well, actually, I published one of these. With regard to, let's see, I could have done two. Which one did I publish? With regard to my frogs in Madagascar. At one point, I'm sitting there watching this marked population of I've tattooed them, so I know who all the individuals are. And I've got a couple of fights going on. I mean, they're very active, fascinating little poisonous frogs. And up from the leaf litter comes a boa and grabs one of the female frogs. I knew the frogs, so I knew this is a female. And all the talking in the landscape stops. All the males stop talking, and everyone kind of slinks off. And this boa kind of chews on the frog for 10, 15 minutes, spits it out. This frog then goes on to become a mother because I'm tracking her. She's tattooed. I know. I see her engage in courtship and lay an egg and feeds her tadpoles, and she ends up fine. And this boa is no longer around after that day. Learned its lesson, but that's one time.
Yeah.
Right? That's one time. I've got one anecdote. It's fascinating, but it is actually a natural history note in, I don't know, Herpetologica, Journal of Herpetology, something.
Yep.
So these things do still exist, but they're rarer and rarer.
They're rarer, and they're not looked at with the same kind of reverence that a database paper is. But from the point of view of actually understanding nature, man, give me a natural historian who knows what they're doing any day, right? Yeah. These people have understood something deep, and it's Dan Jansen, the famous tropical biologist, who once said, a biologist dies with 90% of what he knows, right? Takes it to the grave. And this is unfortunate because in some sense, what a biologist accumulates over, or a naturalist accumulates over a lifetime of watching creatures is really very valuable stuff. And it's just impossible to record all of the things that you've come to understand by all of the anecdotes you've encountered.
Absolutely. I mean, it's actually part of, probably a small part, but part of why you and I find this situation that's going on outside right now so troubling, that we both create sense of our world by going out into it and reflecting on the changing of the seasons and the plants and the birds and everything that's happening just in our immediate vicinity, and being really unable to spend more than a few minutes outside, even while masked. We don't have any N95 masks, but even while masked, without feeling, quite at risk at the moment, puts us at such a remove from an ability to interact with anything that isn't us or what we've created right here, is incredibly restricting.
Yeah, it is. It's turned our world into an all social one, which is something we seek to avoid most of the time. Not that we avoid all social stuff, but we avoid
because we don't like each other very much.
No, we avoid the complete socialness of the world. And anyway, it's been enforced by smoke.
Yep. All right. Do you have any left-leaning critiques of Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist? My kids' elementary school emailed about staff commitment to equity and anti-racism. I only hear bad, but my feeds trend conservative. I won't support the ideology with my dollars by buying the book to verify. Yeah, I've mentioned it a couple of times, and I don't remember which episodes, but it's going to be fairly recent, probably in the 40s. I've talked about some of my objections to his book, and I have not been reading it for the last few days, but I got about halfway through, and I intend to finish it and provide more formal critique, like I did for D'Angelo's White Fragility. But the main one, I guess, is that he sets up a false dichotomy. He coins a term, anti-racist. He defines it to mean those who seek equality of outcome. And he then redefines racist to mean anything that's not anti-racist, which means you are racist in his worldview if you do not seek equality of outcome. And equality of outcome is, broadly understood, at least it was until yesterday, academically speaking, to be a goal that is neither honorable nor liberal nor obtainable. So he's setting us up for failure, and what I've said is I'm anti-racist, and no, that doesn't make me racist.
Yep. Yes. Let's just put it this way. It's a pity in some sense that you don't have a copy. I understand why I don't want to buy a copy, but the illogic that is apparent as it proceeds is so obvious that, it's not a liberal or conservative objection. It's just an objection on the basis that this doesn't add up. Yeah.
No, and I should save this for when and if I do the formal takedown, but there's a point in chapter 10 where he reports on himself in college, Kendi does, as frankly such a racist that he believed enough to say to his college professor that he'd figured out what was wrong with white people and that the problem is that white people are aliens. And his professor, to his credit, says, are you high? I mean, he doesn't say that, but what is wrong with you? And Kendi sort of resolves, oh yeah, I guess it doesn't make sense. I guess we can breed together. Like this is the rejoinder from the professor.
No, you read it to me, and unless I misunderstood it, the professor tells him that can't be right because white people can interbreed.
Right, and Kendi
accepts it.
Yeah.
So
that's what I meant to convey just now.
Well, what I take out of it is that Kendi didn't get there on his own.
No, he did not.
How could you not?
And not only did he not get there on his own, he's 20-year-old college student, but he wrote it into this book. And this isn't his first book.
Right.
This is his latest book. And he'd already had a bestseller, I think. So this is some crackpot racism that is proudly in this book on how to be an anti-racist. But because he's redefined racist and anti-racist, it's not racist to be racist.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Your point about Cuties being a book is interesting, but as soon as it becomes a screenplay, everyone involved becomes suspect. Yeah. Every 11-year-old who auditioned now has an audition tape of performing those movements that will now last forever. Yeah, that's true.
Yep.
Well, I did wonder how old the actual actresses were. Not that it makes any of this better.
No,
but,
it would make it better it doesn't make it a lot better.
Right.
But if they were
it makes it a little bit better, right?
But I think the thing is they were so young they couldn't possibly have been adults.
Yeah.
So it can't be fully better.
Yeah. No way does it get anywhere close to.
Yeah. Not that it would be okay from the audience perspective.
Right.
And frankly, as I said before, I don't think it's even okay from the perspective of, titillating a bunch of old people. But still, it might be okay with respect to the fact that an adult is allowed to make a decision to be in a role like this. And then it becomes troubling from the point of view of the people selling this thing and the audience. But it wasn't even that.
Yeah. Would you agree that early Homo sapiens evolutionary having a hard time speaking today. Would you agree that early Homo sapiens evolutionary success was due in part to our skill in addressing immediate threats like wild animals, etc.? How has that played out, and how does it affect our ability to address climate change?
Certainly, the ability to deal with immediate threats like wild animals is a prerequisite to our success. But I think to the extent that you mean evolutionary success, what you mean is our disproportionate evolutionary success. Wild animals are not a sufficient explanation because predatory ones are sufficiently rare that they just simply don't explain why humans got so much smarter and more capable than other creatures that also have to deal with predators.
Yeah. No, and at the point, this is probably a level of sort of semantics that it was not intended by the question, but if we're talking about early Homo sapiens as opposed to early hominins that have split from the chimp lineage but aren't yet fully Homo sapiens, by the time we're Homo sapiens, we've already gone far down the road. We've already mastered fire. A 1.5 million years ago ish, and Homo sapiens are newer than that. I think Homo sapiens is newer than that, and we're already in this sort of cycle that Dick Alexander describes between ecological dominance, which is a kind of addressing immediate threats like wild animals, and the intergroup competition, which Dick and you and I have argued is going to become more and more important as we become successful in dominating our ecology. So it's really the thing that is more likely to have accompanied our, for instance, rapid brain growth to body size ratio, brain to body size ratio growth, and specifically growth of the prefrontal cortex, has to do with the social stuff.
I wouldn't say the social stuff. I would say it has
planning,
to do with other humans as both opportunities and hazards.
Yeah. And being able to locate yourself on a timeline and think back and reflect back and learn from and project forward and imagine and build narrative about both past and future.
All of the tools that come along with predicting what other human creatures are going to do for the purpose of either partnering with them or challenging them.
All of which seem to be kind of focused in, again, prefrontal cortex, which, again, is also not fully developed until seems to be, current neurobiological models suggest, until people are in their early 20s, which is yet another reason not to imagine that children are adults and have all the capacities of adults and should be allowed to make decisions like become hypersexualized or take exogenous hormones to change their sex, etc. Joe Rogan, while speaking with Tim Kennedy yesterday, in different parts of the conversation endorsed both Tulsi Gabbard and Dan Crenshaw for president. What level of conversation have you had with Rogan about Unity 2020?
I have to keep people's identities out of the discussion. I suppose I could change their names to protect the awesome, but the problem is this is a very complex puzzle, and in order to solve the overarching puzzle of how do we get from here to actual leadership in the White House, many people have to confront their own obstacles, their own social puzzles. And so anyway, it's, is it a Mexican standoff? Is it the penguins waiting at the side of the ice flow in order to have
be the one that gets eaten by a
not be the
leopard
one
seal?
Exactly. I don't know what the right metaphor is, but the point is actually what we're looking for is the thing that catalyzes the change in which a bunch of other things can fall into place. And here's the thing. If you're rooting for Unity 2020, you don't want me to tell you. You want me to leave people as safe to contemplate things as possible, which leaves me being far more ambiguous than I would like.
Good. How can we know whom to trust as a source for climate science? Skeptical of everything. Help. Love you both. Yeah, as you should be, skeptical of everything. And how can we know whom to trust as a source for climate science? This is a tough question. And I don't know if you have any names. I don't actually have any names that I trust. I just know that there are honorable and dishonorable climate scientists out there, as there are honorable and dishonorable everythings out there. And because there is a conclusion that is now the thing that is accepted, it's harder to publish evidence that countervails the conclusion. That said, the conclusion has so much support, the broad conclusion that anthropogenic climate change is happening from so many different kinds of evidence across so many different kinds of both empirical and modeling evidence, that broadly speaking, my doubt of that conclusion is near zero. But any individual result, I am highly skeptical of, even more so than of any other scientific result, because it's become so politicized. And I'll tell an anecdotal story here. Back when we were professors at Evergreen, I was on a hiring committee to hire a climate scientist, and one of our finalists, so academic job hires, you pull 3 people to the short list, and you do a couple day interviews on campus with them. And because it was climate science, we dragged these people out into the woods and walked around the forest with them and talked with them one-on-one. And I was asking one of their candidates one-on-one about a paper that he had published, and asked him why in the methods he had talked about having used 5 models, and it was like all these papers that had like 20 authors on it or something, why there had been 5 models that were discussed in the methods, but only one of them reported in the results. And he laughed as if I was joking, and I pursued it. And then he said, well, I don't know. That's not what I do. And I thought, okay, your name's on this paper. You're trying to get a job doing exactly this work, and you have no idea what justification there is for having said that you had put your data through 5 models but only reported on 1. That sounds like a replication crisis waiting to happen, and no, the guy did not get the job. But I worry that happens too much, with the giant caveat, like I started with, that throughout, since before this was politicized, and across all sorts of domains of types of data, including places where the scientists aren't calling themselves climate scientists, the conclusions overwhelmingly lead to the data overwhelmingly suggest the conclusion that we are plummeting towards anthropogenic climate change that may at some point become irreversible.
I would say James Hansen. I find him trustworthy as a human being. I would say I don't trust the models. It's too easy to lie with models. If you put enough factors in them, you can make them mirror any behavior without doing so because they actually match the causal element. However,
it's easy to be a verificationist with models.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Models can be used to predict things that you might go check empirically, but they can't be used as an empirical check.
Yep.
But what I would say is that which we know for sure is already enough to worry a great deal. CO2 and methane trap heat from the sun. We've known this for more than 100 years. The fact that both of those molecules are rising in their density in the atmosphere, also known to be true. That will have some effect is certain. How much the effect, we can disagree because it's in a complex system. However, the important thing to track is that the danger that one hits a threshold point at which, for example, the release of frozen methane clathrates from the Arctic kicks us into a phase in which we no longer have any control over temperature because you get a positive feedback where the temperature goes up, that unfreezes these frozen methane molecules. They are quickly released. That raises the temperature further, which unfreezes more, and you get a positive feedback. Mm-hmm. That thing is not something you need to detect from here. In fact, you won't detect it until it's too late, right? You can detect that there are these bursts of methane in the Arctic, which we've now seen. What we don't have is really good baseline data on whether that's happening all the time. But there is reason. The Yamal craters, which I pointed to in Siberia, tell us that there are new geological processes going on that appear to be the result of sudden releases of methane. So what we know is there's a whole hell of a lot of methane up there that could come flooding out all of a sudden and could take this question entirely out of human control, right? We don't know where that threshold is. It could happen this evening. Okay?
And the fires could be the thing that do it, right? The release of carbon from these fires is extraordinary.
We have no idea where we are relative to that threshold. Right. We know that it's out there, and the day that it happens, it's not going to make the news. Nobody's going to know that it happened, but there's a day at which this no longer is under human control. So the point is, given what we can say for sure, the rational course is to say we are playing with something very dangerous. The downstream consequences are potentially absolutely catastrophic for humanity. The solutions to these things are likely to be highly generative. Now, here's the hitch. If we were to solve these problems, it would threaten the business models of many established businesses. That's why we don't do it. It's not that it would make life horrible for us to solve these things. In fact,
speak a little bit more. So, I mean, you buried the lead a little bit, you said. Solving these problems the solutions could be generative.
Yeah.
Like the solutions could actually be good for individual humans and the economy. What it won't be good for is the established organizations that have already made a business in the old economy.
Right. And in fact, you can see this by projecting backwards. We've been talking about carbon tax forever, right? A substantial carbon tax. Now, a carbon tax has a cost, an economic cost that's substantial. But if 25 years ago or 30 years ago we had seen this coming and we had instituted a moderate tax then, which had driven the innovations in battery technology that we have seen, right? All sorts of things that we all regard as awesome about the modern world would have happened earlier.
This is what regulation is supposed to do.
Right.
Incentivize you to limit the negative externalities that you impose on the world.
Right. Now, the key thing would have been, and frankly, we were the country that dragged our heels, but the key thing to do would have been to partner with other nations so that we would not have been at disadvantage for instituting that carbon tax. We could have had the cost distributed in a fair way. So that the point is innovation of a kind that's great, right? You don't want to breathe exhaust, right? Frankly, I was using an electric chainsaw just early this week. Electric chainsaw, it's pretty darn good, right? It's not loud. It doesn't put out exhaust. There are all sorts of advantages. And the point is, it hasn't been plausible until recently because the battery technology has been lagging. So if you can solve the economic competition problem and you can get everybody to share their bit of the burden, and you are not constrained to protecting currently successful businesses, you can do great things. And so were we to address climate change, it's getting late, but were we to address it, we would be living in a time when there was plenty to do for innovators, because we would have to figure out how to do lots of things that we already do in some new and better way. And so the point is, that's a lot of good jobs.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's the pitch.
Let's try to get through a few more of these before switching. Hypothetical. For 1,000 generations, a lineage of isolated humans wore masks to hide from natural ills. We did not. We experienced all else the same. We meet them. Their immune systems are stronger or weaker than ours.
Well, I hesitate with these stronger or weaker immune system things, but I think in some sense we know the answer here, because the germs in guns, germs, and steel are the result of the fact that Europeans who came to the New World were in some sense the beneficiaries of confrontations with germs that they had already had. And the reason that it was Europeans who had those confrontations with germs was that the domesticable animals were highly concentrated in Asia. And because Asia is longitudinally laid out, the migration of those animals into Europe was unimpeded. And so the point was, it was the close contact with pigs and cattle and other large domesticable creatures that caused Europeans to have already had experience that made them durable with respect to many germs. So most germs, and the most deadly ones, impacted natives of the New World rather than conquistadors having brought back deadly diseases from the New World.
Yeah. So I mean, there's two questions in one question here, and you can't do both at once because you have to control for one. And obviously, it's a hypothetical that can't be done. But so old world meets new world is a story of allopatry. How could we ask this question with sympatry, which to say two populations living side by side, one of whom is masked, one of whom is not, wherein they are being exposed to the same stuff, except the people with masks are presumably getting exposed less. What then might be the distinction after 1,000 generations between simply being exposed to fewer airborne and aerosolized pathogens versus more? I could see it going either way. Frankly, it depends on exactly what pathogens were met, right? Like the pathogen, the deadly pathogen that you are saved from because you're wearing a mask that otherwise wipes you out is obviously you're better off if you're masked. Over 1,000 generations, protecting yourself from every single thing that is out there might make you less resilient when something flips a vector model, for instance. It moves into, say, contact transmission rather than aerosol transmission.
I don't think so. And the reason I don't think so is because of carrying capacity. So if you've got these two populations, let's make them sympatric, so they're living in the same place. But you expose one of them to more pathogens and some of them die. That's selection for immunity, and it will leave a population that has that immunity in its wake, whereas the unexposed or less exposed population will have undergone less selection. So it's not just the immunity that comes from the individual having encountered the pathogen that informs their immune system. It's the selection that favors immunity towards those pathogens.
So by the same logic that if you don't finish your course of antibiotics, the bacteria that you leave are stronger and more resistant to antibiotics in the future, the population that was what? Not wearing the masks or wearing the mask? Which way did your story go?
The population that was not wearing the masks will be stronger at the end of that selective phase.
So that's consistent, I think, with what I was saying as well. So what that, the obvious place to go then, if we were in conversation with Jeffrey, who asked, no, it's different, with Michael, who asked the question, would be, okay, then at what time scale does mask wearing make sense? Like if at 1,000 generation time scale, mask wearing might make a population weaker, at what time scale does it make sense? And I think part of the answer is going to be that for individuals, no individual wants to die of this thing. So at the population level, you might end up with a stronger population, but individuals all want to survive.
Right. And so really what you're comparing is, for the individual, the cost of getting sick and the risk of dying from being sick versus the cost of being naive and
naive to the pathogen.
And the problem is that the benefit to being naive to the pathogen is effectively zero. So the benefit to being not sick is substantial.
So, and that fits with this sort of filling the bucket model of exposure, right? You're not actually looking for zero exposure at all.
Yep.
You're looking for a little bit of exposure occasionally over time, such that your immune system can maybe taste it and get a sense of what it is.
Well, I see a lot of people playing with this idea that low exposure to COVID, for example, might produce some sort of immunity. It's very hard to demonstrate that this is true.
Of course.
But it's plausible.
And it's consistent with the idea that apparently, I don't have it pulled up, so I can't show you guys, but there's some recent work suggesting that mask wearers compared to non-mask wearers in otherwise identical situations have less severe symptoms when they contract COVID. And so that, again, is suggestive of the sort of density-dependent model of virulence of the disease. Okay. Critical race theory is spreading rapidly through public school systems, corporations, and even military schools. What does the United States look like if these advocates get what they want? It kind of looks like the streets of Portland.
Well, it looks like a failed state, because we know that this is not a proper recipe for being able to compete with others, and therefore anything that succumbs to this will be vulnerable in competition to anything that resists it. And that goes for nations. Any nation that doesn't do this will be at advantage over nations that do this. Any school of engineering that doesn't do it will produce higher quality graduates, etc. So seems pretty straightforward.
All right. Several more before we switch, because many of these are comments. Love you both. Would be awesome to see Bret and Eric host a roundtable with pro-Trump libertarians such as Candace Owens and Stefan Molyneux to both steelman the cases for and against, as well as sow seeds to #HealTheDivide. I'll just let you grimace at the screen and go on to the next one.
Well, I get into trouble when I talk about Candace. I don't trust Candace. I don't think. Let me be careful about this. Many of the things Candace says are right. The question is, why does Candace say them? And I would love to believe that Candace is growing up and becoming more nuanced, but I don't really see that.
I think the best model to describe left versus right is as explored versus unexplored territory. Conservatives, but except that's reversed, I think. So I'm going to read it the way I think this person means it. I think the best model to describe left versus right is as unexplored versus explored territory. Conservatives seek to preserve what's established, but can sometimes stagnate, whereas liberals push new bounds, but sometimes go too far. I think that's quite right. I think that's quite good. A comment, please talk with David Friedman, law professor, economist, theoretical physicist, oddly shunned by other libertarians because he's such a principled scientific thinker. Well, that's a claim. Maybe that's why he's shunned. Could be. Tragically underappreciated genius, needs to be part of the conversation. I don't know the name. Do you know him?
No.
Okay. Last question here, and then we'll skip to the ones from this hour. Do Western states need to radically change their forestry management to combat the symptom of climate change, or will that just make it worse? Are we missing pragmatic leadership versus just blame games? Yeah.
There's a lot of room for clever improvements on what we've got. And unfortunately, we have a dearth of leadership and possibly a dearth of insight where it needs to be. But yes, we could be doing a whole heck of a lot better.
Yeah. So, Zach, I don't see a line here, but I think I'm at 30. Is that right?
Oh, I completely forgot to make the line. Give me a second.
No, I think I got it. Yeah, so the militant moderate is sort of filling in for us here on when Joe Rogan in episode 1535 says that he likes Tulsi, feels like she was canceled by the DNC, and then says later, I love Dan Crenshaw. That's another guy who should run for president.
Yeah. Tulsi and Dan, that's a cool idea.
Yeah. Where have I heard that before?
Yeah.
With new waves of immigrants, with new waves of immigrants, the first mixed couples seem to be newcomers, men and women who've been on the territory longer. A generation later, couples are newcomers, women, and established men. Is that a pattern? And if so, how would you explain it? So, this is unintentionally sort of telegraphically written, or telepathically written, because of the limits on characters. What the question is arguing, I believe, is the observation is that in new waves of immigrants, when you have couples between the newcomers and the established people, and I don't know if this means established people from the immigrant country or from the new country. Early on, the mixed couples seem to be that men are the newcomers and women who've been on the territory longer, and then later on, a few generations later, when it's mixed couples, it's women who are new and men who have been on the territory for longer. And
wait, I'm confused by what you said, and I don't quite get it. When you have an immigrant population, the initial couples tend to be
mixed couples,
right?
Mm-hmm.
Those couples tend to be resident men and newcomer women?
Yeah, but I think actually it means from the old country, but they've just been there longer. So not resident of, if we were talking about, for instance, Jamaican immigrants to the U.S.,
right?
Where the claim isn't American women and Jamaican men. It's
the other way around.
It's Jamaican women from 3 generations ago who've been here for longer, and then newcomer Jamaican men. So it's not about European descended Americans. It's about the immigrant population in all cases, but how long you've been in country. So
I don't think I get it then.
I understand the question, but I don't, and I've seen that. Did see this question once before on our private Q&A, and I didn't go to it because I don't recognize it as a pattern. So I would want to see some evidence of it actually being a pattern before I tried to do some sort of like an adaptive arm waving explanation for why it might be true, because it's never occurred to me that it was true, and I'm not saying it's not. I just have never seen it. And I've never thought to look for it nor seen it before.
I think your interpretation is wrong. I think what it means is when you have an immigrant population to an existing population, that the first couplings, interracial couplings, will tend to be those men who are from the home population and women who are from the immigrant population. You disagree that that's the?
I think you got it backwards.
So I think that's the I think that's the way it is, and I think that
no,
that
I
would
think
also
so.
be,
There's 2 different possible interpretations. I just don't think we should spend more time here. But I think you've got it backwards from what she has said here, and then there's an interpretation that you and I have different. It's about immigrant men versus native women versus immigrant men versus longer ago immigrant women. So that's the point of disagreement between you and me, but then I think you just sort of reversed the hypothesis here in addition. So I think we need more clarification and even just evidence, because the idea of trying to come up with why a pattern that may or may not exist does exist is not maybe dangerous, but kind of fruitless and not that useful an exercise, I would say. Supporting the duopoly creates a dystopian future where evil robots rule the land. They can't master time travel, but they can make technology glitch. Get a flux capacitor and your problem will be solved. You're welcome.
Or a P-38 modulator unit.
What?
We could get one to blow up the Earth.
Oh, is that from Bugs Bunny?
Marvin the Martian? Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Or flux capacitor would be all right, too.
It seems like that's probably more likely to be available at the nearby hardware
While
store.
we are on the glitch question, several people suggested that we get a... why am I forgetting the term for it? Spectrum analyzer. But what are the details of the object that we need to buy? If you know, please put it in the chat.
You can just put it in chat because Zach, I think, is looking at the chat at the moment. Yeah. Given escalating strife, is it possible for the United States to consciously uncouple and form separate entities and countries a la the USSR? Love you guys. Okay, you made me laugh by using consciously uncouple here. Can the U.S. consciously uncouple? I don't think so.
No, that's the biggest problem here is that there's just no geographical resolution to be had, which doesn't mean that it won't come apart into.
There's always talk about California seceding or the West Coast seceding or Texas seceding.
The cities can secede from the states.
Right. What is the West Coast seceding going to look like? Because actually, other than a 50-mile strip along the coasts, the politics of inland West are very different from coastal West, for instance.
And urban and rural. So I think the point is, sorry, that dog ain't going to hunt. So we need to figure. Well, it ain't.
Fair enough.
Yeah. So. I do think we simply need to figure out how not to go down that road, because anybody who's imagining that we're going to get some kind of workable divorce out of this is missing the geographical point.
Have you heard the song The Greatest Show on Earth by Nightwish? It is about evolution and features Dawkins. I have not. Have you?
Nope.
Okay. Master's in physics student here. Bret, is there any way to nudge your brother into publishing for rigorous scrutiny his geometric unity? Love from Texas.
There are those who could, but they are not of this earth. No, look, the dude wants to publish. He does. He's busy, and there are hazards in the way, but to the extent that there is hunger for this thing, I think nothing would please Eric more than to publish this stuff. And so I expect to see it soon, because I think the world is becoming more hospitable to the possibility of such a thing emerging from the quadrant that is Eric.
The whole family's on the podcast, says someone. We got a substantial representation here. We got half of the organisms who have names who live in our house on air-ish. The dog's below our feet here. And Fairfax is in my lap. Half? Did I get that right? Yes, half. There are 8 of us who live here. 4 non-human animals and 4 humans. Thoughts on Disney thanking government agencies responsible for propaganda hiding... Remind me how to pronounce this. Uighur? This word? It's not
Uyghur.
spelled right. Right. Uighur camps in there. I don't even know how to pronounce this Disney film. Milan? We lived in Michigan for a while, and they pronounced Milan. So now whenever I see this word, I have no idea. And I don't think that's how the Disney film is spelled either.
And they pronounced Celine.
Or something like that, yeah. I think it's Mulan, actually, which is not what this word says. Okay, so I don't know how to pronounce these words anyway, but I'm a speller, and so once I don't know how to pronounce them and they're not spelled right, I'm just like, all bets are off. That's my excuse. The question is basically, do you have thoughts on Disney thanking government agencies who were responsible for propaganda, hiding these camps in credits of some film? Also, are there any meaningful differences between the Chinese Communist Party and Nazi Germany at this point? They both seem to have ethnic concentration camps, centralized autocracies, and are expanding along questionable claims of historical ethnic ties. Examples include Mongolia and Indian border currently. So I don't really know anything about the Disney story. I've sort of
I don't
heard
either.
glimmerings of it, but I just can't speak to that. What about CCP and Nazi Germany?
Yeah, I don't think we want to leap to the Nazi comparison too early. The fact is, we do not, as far as I know, have evidence of the systematic extermination of the Uyghur. We have evidence of concentration camps. We have evidence of organ harvesting, forced sterilization. So these things are really, really terrible without rising quite to the level of the Nazis' systematic extermination of Jews, homosexuals, Jehovah's Witnesses,
Gypsies,
Gypsies.
intellectuals.
Right. So that's not to, I mean, look, this shows the signs of a situation that does head that direction. But let's, if we leap to that conclusion too early, then we lose the ability to level that charge when it is apt. So there's plenty of room for evil below that threshold.
Yep. So I can't tell if this is our screen or something. Doctor, can you figure out what that says?
Dr.H semicolon lowercase u.
Yeah. So I don't know if that's supposed to be an S.
Might be an S.
So in which case it would be Dr. Sue, Doctor Who with maybe that's just supposed to be a diacritical mark. And of course, YouTube won't allow that. Dr. Someone who, Sue, said on JRE, equality does not mean symmetry. So that is absolutely true. That has me rethinking my views on feminism. According to you, what is the equality that you should aim for? Could people then argue women don't deserve certain rights because you don't have certain capacities as men? So I think equality under the law and equality in terms of outcome and ability are different. And we are, a liberal worldview, a democratic worldview suggests that equality under the law is something that we should all have and that we must strive for 100%. That is a place where equality of outcome is absolutely desirable and should be what we are striving for. That does not presume, though, and it should not presume that it means that we are actually the same. And so, well, there's a lot more to say here, but I don't know if we're getting in the weeds here a little bit.
I am not sure that I agree that equality under the law is equality of outcome. I think it's actually a cryptic form of opportunity. The law is protecting the opportunity, and it is the balance of the law, the blind justice that distributes the opportunity that comes from the legal protection evenly.
Yeah.
So I would say, it's easy to deal with equality of opportunity as a cliche. But I think the point is that is in some sense the opportunity we are talking about being equalized, but there are two components, right? It is important that no group have an advantage at the level of opportunity, and there are many groups that do have advantages at the level of opportunity, though how that advantage is passed on and all of these things are murky. But it is also important that opportunity itself be substantial rather than trivial, right? So there's a question of how much opportunity, and then there's a question of where it is. And we want to increase the amount of opportunity and decrease the level of its concentration. And I think, whether it's exactly equal, it's never going to be. But how the unfairness is distributed should be a focus. It should be distributed as evenly as possible. And the opportunity should be as broadly distributed as possible.
Good. Wow, I can't even get to my trackpad now. What is the relationship between evolutionary biology and morality? What universal moral taboos or ethical truths are rooted deeper than culture?
Well, I would say rooted deeper than culture is not what you're looking for. Culture is just as biological as genes. It is a separate mode of transmission. And morality is effectively, it is a product of evolution. We know that it's a product of evolution because behaving morally is costly in obvious ways relative to the evolutionary goal of increasing fitness. And so it must be paying its way somehow. That is to say, fitness may not be defined exactly as we expect it to be, and morality can increase overall fitness. You could increase your long-term fitness by foregoing short-term fitness-enhancing opportunities, for example. But basically, the answer is going to be rooted in trade-offs. I wrote a paper about this many years ago. I won't drag you through the logic of it, but for a lineage, moral precepts that result in long-term enhancement of fitness, meaning persistence, will be favored and therefore will be inscribed in culture. That's basically the model.
You're at 1 hour and 15 minutes.
Okay, let's do a couple more.
Okay.
Part 1. Okay, so we got 2-part question here. Jordan Peterson said men use the same circuit to hunt when looking for mates. Dogs like toys that squeak when they bite. It makes them think they made a kill. In one uncomfortable context, it seems women instinctively trigger this circuit in a similar way by spontaneously emitting dying prey animal noises. That sounds pretty ridiculous to me. I have great respect for Jordan Peterson and his thinking, and I think he has been. I think the woke left has tried to drag him through the mud, and the woke left has merely ended up looking quite muddy and ridiculous as a result. But I'd like to see what he has to say here. But if he really says this, I just think he's wrong.
Well, I will say
the same circuit,
right? No.
Hunting for mates, hunting for prey. No,
I will say one thing one sees young women do is squeal to attract attention. So I don't know that has anything to do with hunting, but it does have to do with hitting some frequency that causes attention to be drawn to them at some moment when they are engaged.
In fact, this happens in Cuties at one point, which I think both of us were like, oh God, they're doing that thing.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. We need to follow up on the Black Intellectuals episode you did. Please make it happen. Make it like a monthly or bi-monthly thing. Thanks for the pod. That's from Moo for me, I'll move for you.
That's a strange name.
Yeah.
Yes, there is something in the works. So sit tight. I don't think you'll be disappointed.
Okay. Wake up. Hit the like button. There are 2,000 people watching. Let's go, people. Thanks. Thank you. I didn't just make that up.
Hell yeah.
And thanks for having the cats and dog on the podcast. You are welcome. Okay. 2 more questions. No, 3. We'll end up with this one. Okay. Why did Heather immediately move to cover the cat's butthole? What evolved imperative was behind that gesture? I just didn't think you needed to see it.
Yeah.
He keeps himself clean because he's a cat, but I just don't think there's any reason.
I don't understand. What person wouldn't pull the cat's tail down and point their butt away from the camera? It seems to me like the right thing to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. This one, finish here. Pearl Harbor was a mostly peaceful Japanese flyover. It's a great meme on Twitter right now, complete with CNN Chiron. Chiron? Sorry, I had to split my question. Okay. Good. That sounds appropriate. Final question. Can you speak to the issue of COVID denial and delusion amongst family members and friends? That is, somehow if you are a family member or a friend, you are not an asymptomatic and will not wear masks in each other's presence. Hopefully that didn't get cut off. There's the rest of a question that I don't see anywhere here. So how do you talk to people who imagine, I don't even know what the narrative sounds like in your head, but I know
I'm seeing a very dumb breakdown in conversation.
Yeah.
Which is I think it's the right has a point, which is that how we respond to this pandemic should be sensitive to all of the costs, including deaths that will arise because of lockdown, for example. Mm-hmm. And that we are not doing a holistic analysis. We're missing how many deaths will be caused by economic failure, blah, 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 all those things, right? This then results in a rejection of the idea that we should be doing drastic things because the death rate isn't what we feared it might be, right? Mm-hmm. I don't think the death rate is where it's at all, right? So, I saw somebody we respect on Twitter the other day say, the rate of death for kids under 16 is below some very low number, tell me again why schools are still happening remotely.
Right.
And the answer is, well, if kids can get it, and they can, and they're going to bring it home, and they will, and somebody else is going to catch it, and they will, and it's going to damage their heart or their brain, then what is the cost of that interaction? Likewise,
so that at least, though, is really complex, right? So that the costs of schools being virtual to both the kids and their social development and the parents and their inability to have their lives is huge.
Yep.
And the fact that kids themselves don't appear to be getting sick is true, even though all of these other things are true. I'm not sure where I fall out on what I think should be happening, and I think it's different in different parts of the country, different parts of the world. But I can tell you for sure that virtual schooling is a farce.
Oh, it's
a farce, right? So what are we doing? This question, though, is both difficult, but I think a little easier, which is it's not necessarily easier in the moment, but how do you talk to people people in your circle, when like, oh, I finally get to see you, but actually, given that we don't live together and aren't breathing the same air all the time, we either have to stay far apart or mask and be careful, because why is it that you imagine that you're like, why have you decided that you're inherently safe for me? That's not your decision to make.
Right.
Right.
So I have been having these conversations, and typically I will take somebody outdoors to have a conversation, and I'll say,
not to beat them up behind the woodshed.
Those are different people.
We don't have a woodshed. That's part of the problem.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
But I will take people outside, and I'll say, hey, let's have this conversation outside where COVID does not apparently transmit, yet at least.
Right.
The other thing that I will say when people are like, isn't this mask business silly? I'll say, I think people have it wrong. You should see you should go to the subreddit of people who have tested COVID positive and look at the people who have long-term symptoms that don't seem to go away.
Mm-hmm.
You should also look at the data on heart damage and long-term brain damage, and you should realize that we don't even know whether you get long-term immunity after you've had this, whether the thing might reside in neurons, blah, 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 blah. And so the point is, you say, here are all of these unknowns. Now the question is, what do we do? It's not clear to anybody, because until those unknowns are answered, we don't know what the costs are. But, it may be that everybody, let's say that half the people who got COVID are going to lose a decade or more off their life.
That's probably extreme, but
Yep. But we don't know one way or the other.
Yeah.
Could be a larger number and a smaller number of years.
Yep.
Right?
Seems more likely, but
the point is, and we, if you're going to get it every 5 years, because it's going to circulate and your immunity doesn't last, what does that say to us? So there are all of these things. And from my perspective, I don't know how we get to the conversation, which is, let's talk about what we should have done, right? We should have really locked down for a much shorter period of time, right? We should not be dealing with schools coming back in virtual form.
Oh my God.
We should have taken
6 months later,
6 weeks, and we should have done this properly, and we should have put everything necessary to get highly reliable testing. So the combination of a very intense brief lockdown followed by very accessible high quality testing would have been enough. And the point is, somehow
even absent super high quality testing, pooled testing. That allows you then, at the end of it, like, okay, what is it? I think University of Arizona maybe is testing their student population this way and actually keeping numbers low compared to like every other college campus that actually has students.
By pooled testing, you mean you pool a bunch of people together, and if anybody tests positive, then you do the fine grains.
So it's like like everyone being regularly tested a lot, frequently, but every test is like inputs from 100 people.
Yeah. And
you have to have very, very low false positives for this to work.
Yes.
But the false negatives don't matter as much because, they don't matter as much. Any positive you get from that, then you break it into groups of 10, whatever. I don't know exactly what the protocols are, but you actually can just like really quickly get through a whole bunch of tests this way and rule out, okay, all of you guys are safe and you can like still be careful, but you can go about your business.
Right.
Yeah.
But what I'm trying to get past is the sense that what has unfolded is a vindication for the side that wasn't all that worried about this in the first place.
Yeah.
I am if anything, more worried than I was because of all the things we don't know and the fact that what we've learned is pretty frightening, even if it doesn't amount to sudden death for people. So the point is, look, I don't really want responsibility for what to do now. I want to say, what should we have done then? And who was saying that? Why didn't we listen to those voices? And what are they saying now? Right? That I think is what we should be doing. And it doesn't amount to, let's end this lockdown already. This was a false alarm, because that's not what happened.
Yeah.
We're an hour and 25 minutes.
Okay, we're done, except there's one more comment that I think we need to end on, which is, quote, "I saw a moose in the desert," end quote. Bartender, I'll have what he's having.
It's called A Moose in the Desert.
That was basically my reaction when you came home with the boys from that field trip that you'd run with one of your classes. Like, we saw a moose at Sun Lakes. I'm like, sure you did. But I think that was the reaction of the ranger too, right? You told the ranger there.
But I still struggle with the ranger's reaction because I saw a moose in the desert. I was with a great number of people who also saw it, so I knew it wasn't a hallucination.
And y'all weren't tripping.
We weren't tripping.
Okay.
We were field tripping, but we weren't tripping. And anyway, so saw the thing. I'm a mammologist. I know a damn moose when I see one. So anyway, I said to the ranger, I didn't know if this was the first time this had ever happened. And I said to the ranger, I believe I saw a moose out at Deep Lake. And he says, I don't think so. And, I said, I feel pretty certain it was there. He said, no. And I said, has there ever been one here before? And he said, it happens every now and again. And it was like, well, if I just told you I saw a moose and it happens every now and again, doesn't it stand to reason that was the moose in question?
Oh, that is a very surprising conversation to have
It was a very surprising conversation. I'm somewhat traumatized by the logic
This is
of
like
it.
8 years later or something.
Yeah. Well, every so often it gives me a nightmare.
Yeah. Well, all right. I think we've come to the end of another live stream. We will try to be back Tuesday. I'm not sure. But if so, it will be later because Zachary is now back in full-time virtual school. Which means our producer cannot be producing until something like 3:30 Pacific time in the afternoon if we do come back on Tuesday. In the meantime, consider joining the Discord server at either of our Patreons or getting access to the previous private Q&As on my Patreon and joining us for the next one.
Yes. Again, if you know what it is that we need to use in order to sort out our interference problem, I think everybody will be happier if we can get to the bottom of this. So tell us what device that might be and how much we need to spend to get it. Please like, subscribe, comment, spread the word, check out the Clips channel, pass along little bits that you think might be worth other people seeing.
Send clear wishes for us in Fairfax.
Yes, hope for the best with respect to fire and smoke, and stay safe. We'll see you next time.